Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins long ago in the deep places of the world, beneath the roots of the Misty Mountains. There was a kingdom of stone and song, a realm carved with the wisdom of ages. It was a kingdom of the Dwarves, the folk of Durin, whose axes rang upon rock and whose voices wove echoes into the vast halls of their home. In those elder days, before the world was darkened by great sorrows, before dragons stole gold and shadow took shape in the east, there was only light in Khazad-dûm. The Dwarves called it the greatest of their works, the jewel of their people, a city that stretched not across land, but through the heart of the mountains themselves. Its halls were vast, held aloft by pillars shaped like trees, its walls smooth as the face of a lake at dawn, and in its depths ran rivers that sang as they flowed through tunnels of living rock. Durin the Deathless was the father of this kingdom, the eldest of the 7 fathers of the Dwarves, the first to awaken from stone when the world was still young. He walked the world before the sun and moon, before even the first kingdoms of men or the first songs of elves. He wandered through the mountains, and in the clear waters of Khazad-dûm, the mirror, he beheld his own reflection, but not as it was. Upon his brow shone a crown of stars, and he knew then that this place, this valley nestled among peaks, would be the seat of his people. And so, beneath the towering heights of the Misty Mountains, he and his kin began their great work. The Dwarfs were a people of craft, of patience, of stone hewers and jewel smiths. They dug deep, shaping halls that gleamed with polished granite and silver-veined marble. In time, Khazad-dûm became a wonder beyond all others, a city where the light of torches and lanterns shimmered on gold-trimmed walls, where the echoes of hammer and chisels rang in perfect harmony. But it was not only stone and gold that made this place mighty. Beneath the roots of the mountains, the Dwarves found something rarer than any other treasure: Mithril, a metal so light that it seemed woven from moonlight itself, yet stronger than the hardiest steel. The elves marveled at it, the men of far-off lands coveted it, but only the Dwarves' wares knew its true worth. They shaped it into mail that no blade could pierce, into circlets that shone like silver stars, into runes and relics that endured beyond time. And so the wealth of Khazad-dûm grew. For long years the Dwarves dwelt in peace beneath the mountain. They welcomed travelers through their eastern gates, trading with the Elves of Eregion, the land of smiths, whose people crafted wonders of their own. In those days there was friendship between dwarf and elf, for though they were different in heart and mind, both shared the love of making, the joy of hands shaping the world into beauty. But time, as it ever does, brought change. The world beyond the mountains shifted, and the shadows of the east lengthened. In On, the elves forged their greatest works, rings of power, gifts of wisdom and might. And in their making, they drew the eye of one who watched from afar. He was no mere king nor sorcerer, but a being of old, one whose malice had waded through the long ages of the world. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he walked among the elves with honeyed words and a fair face. But he was no friend to them, for Annatar was none other than Sauron the Deceiver, the servant of Morgoth, who had long sought to rule the world in darkness. He guided the hands of the elven smiths, teaching them secrets, whispering into their minds. And so the rings were made, rings of power meant to strengthen their bearers, to preserve beauty, to shield against the slow decay of time. Yet even as the elves wrought their craft, Sauron prepared his own hand. In the fires of Mount Doom he forged a ring unlike the others, a master ring bound to his will, a ring to rule them all. And when he set it upon his finger, the elves knew at last they had been betrayed. War came to Middle-earth. Eregion burned, its halls broken, its people scattered. The Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, though strong, did not march to war. They had no love for the quarrels of elves and men. But they did not abandon their allies entirely. When the enemy came, black banners flowing upon the wind, the gates of Khazad-dûm were sealed. The dwarves barred their halls against the darkness, and in that hour they gained another name. The elves called them Moria, the Black Pit. For to them the doors that had once stood open had become a barrier, a silent tomb. But within the halls of Duran's folk, life did not cease. The dwarves endured as they ever had. They labored, they mined, they sang deep songs beneath vaulted ceilings, and they delved ever deeper. For though Duran was long gone, though his beard had turned to dust and his throne stood empty, his people still sought riches. They still sought Mithril, that silver light hidden beneath stone. Then one day, in the lowest deeps of Khazad-dûm, beneath the old foundations of the mountain, they found something else. Something they did not expect. Something that had been sleeping for longer than the dwarfs had even existed. And as the pickaxes rang against the stone, as the final layer of rock crumbled away, the darkness stirred. Far above, in the great halls of Moria, where pillars stood like the trunks of mighty trees, a single tremor ran through the stone. It was the first whisper of ruin, and though the dwarves did not yet know it, the kingdom of Khazad-dûm had begun its fall. Deep beneath the mighty ribs of the Misty Mountains, where the bones of the earth ran thick with veins of silver and mithril, where time flowed differently and the light of day was but a legend murmured in the voices of those who still remembered it, a silence had settled. It was not the silence of peace, nor the silence of rest, but something deeper, something woven into the stone itself, as if the mountain was listening, waiting, holding its breath. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm had long since stopped fearing the darkness. To them it was not an enemy, nor a void to be shunned, but a companion, an old friend, a quiet space in which they could carve, chisel, and shape the world into something greater than what had existed before. They had walked through endless tunnels of shadow, their lanterns trembling upon walls that had never known the touch of the sun, and they had breathed the thick, heavy air of their minds as if it were no different from the wind upon the mountaintops. Yet on that day, on that fateful day when the picks struck just a little too deep, when the echoes of hammer and chisel stirred something ancient, something forgotten, the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of the mountain. It was the silence of something waking. Borrier, son of Thousand, stood at the edge of the lowest tunnels, a sturdy figure draped in a miner's heavy garb, his beard dusted with the fine gray of freshly split stone. His hands, calloused from years of wielding tools, rested upon the worn handle of his pickaxe, though at that moment he had no will to swing it. His breath came slow, measured, though within his chest his heart had begun to beat with the rhythm of something uneasy. He had lived long enough to know the whispers of the deep, how the stone sang when it was ready to yield its treasures, how the air shifted when a tunnel threatened collapse. But this was different. The very rock beneath his boots felt thinner, stretched, as if something below it had been waiting to be touched. He turned, his voice low but steady. "Hold your tools, lads. There's something here." The other dwarves, standing in the half-light of lanterns strung upon iron hooks, hesitated, their hands still gripping their chisels and hammers, their breath fogging faintly in the cold air. Among them was Duran's kin, Nar, son of Fundin, a dwarf of great years, whose beard was streaked with silver and whose eyes bore the weight of long experience. He stepped forward, peering at Borrier through the dim haze of dust. "You've the look of a dwarf who's just seen a ghost," Nar muttered, his voice a deep rumble, ancient as the stone itself. "And yet I see no wraiths here, only rock. Only the good, honest earth, same as ever it was." Borrier did not answer immediately. He knelt, pressing his palm against the floor of the tunnel, feeling for the heartbeat of the stone, for the old voices that ran through its veins. The earth had always spoken to him in ways that few understood, in ways that even the elves, with all their wisdom, could not grasp. But this was not the slow, patient song of Khazad-dûm's depths. It was a whisper, faint but insidious, curling upward from below. A breath. His fingers clenched. "It isn't right," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "The air, it's moving when it shouldn't be." Nar exhaled, stepping closer, his heavy boots crunching softly against the stone. "You fear shadows beneath the rock? Shadows are not our enemy, Bor, you know this. The darkness has never done us harm." Borrier lifted his gaze, his dark eyes glinting beneath heavy brows. "It isn't the dark I fear, Nar." He hesitated, then spoke the words that had formed like stone settling into a crack. "It's what may be listening in the dark." For a moment there was no answer, only the flickering of lanterns, the sound of distant water dripping from unseen crevices. The other miners glanced at one another, their unease growing, though none would speak it aloud. Then Nar sighed, a long and measured breath. He looked beyond Borrier, toward the jagged wall of stone that had only just been broken, the opening through which the pickaxes had cut. Something unknown. "Then let us listen." Bor hesitated, but at last he nodded. The other dwarfs, silent now, stepped back, allowing the two elders to move closer to press their ears against the cold rock and listen. Not for the song of Mithril, not for the hum of metal waiting to be shaped, but for something deeper, something older than their craft. At first there was nothing, only the familiar hush of the mountain's belly, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the deep places. Then a breath, a single exhalation, soft as the whisper of wind through a forgotten cavern, but fast. It seemed to move through the stone itself, curling around the edges of the tunnel, seeping into the lantern-lit gloom like mist creeping along a river at dawn. It was not the breath of something living, yet neither was it dead. It was ancient, too old to be called either. And with that breath came a memory, not of the dwarves, not of Khazad-dûm, but of something older, something that had watched the ages pass in silence, undisturbed, until now. Nar pulled away first, his skin paling beneath his thick beard. His hands, steady even in the battles of his youth, trembled faintly as he took a step back. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Durin's Bane," he breathed, the words nearly lost to the stillness. The name sent a ripple through the gathered dwarves, like a stone cast into a black lake. They did not know what it meant, not fully, not yet, but they knew enough to understand that they had touched something they should not have touched. Borrier straightened slowly, his jaw tightening. He did not speak immediately, for there was nothing to say, nothing that could capture the weight that had settled upon his chest like a stone dragged from the deepest tunnels. His people had built their halls with courage, with patience, with love for the craft, for the shaping of the world's bones into beauty. And yet they had been warned time and again by stories, by the faint whisper of dread in their oldest songs. Delve not too deep. They had always thought it was a warning against greed, but greed was something they understood. This was something else. He turned, his voice low, measured but heavy with the weight of the truth. "We go no further." Nar's eyes met his, dark pools of thought, of ancient knowledge. Slowly, the older dwarf nodded. But the stone had already been broken, and the darkness had already stirred. The silence did not break. It stretched thick and ponderous like a heavy cloak laid upon the stone, smothering the flickering light of the lanterns and pressing upon the gathered dwarves with a weight that none of them had the courage to put into words. It was not merely the hush of a still cavern, nor the pause of miners waiting for orders. It was a thing alive, a presence felt in the marrow of their bones, as if the very air had grown dense, curling around their throats like unseen fingers. The breath of the mountain had changed. It was colder now, emptier, as if the deep places had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but waiting darkness. Boromir's fingers clenched tightly around the haft of his pickaxe, though he had no intention of swinging it again. His knuckles were pale beneath the dust that clung to them, his stance rigid, as though he had become part of the stone itself. His mind, so used to the steady rhythms of the earth, the song of rocks splitting, the whisper of shifting tunnels, felt suddenly unmowed, cast adrift in waters where no light could reach. He had always thought of himself as a man of certainty, of practical truths, of the kind of wisdom that came not from books or counsels, but from the weight of a chisel in his hand, the feel of stone yielding beneath his work. But now, standing before the jagged wound in the tunnel wall, he felt something that had not touched him since childhood: doubt. Not the small kind, the passing uncertainty of a poorly cut vein of ore, nor the hesitant caution before a dangerous descent, but the deep, gnawing kind. The kind that settled in the chest and stayed there, burrowing beneath the ribs, whispering that something had gone wrong in a way that could not be undone. Nar had not spoken again, nor had he moved. His breath was slow and shallow, the glow of the lanterns casting uneasy shadows across the lines of his face, deepening the furrows in his brow, making him look older than he had only minutes before. When he finally exhaled, it was a long, drawn-out sound, barely more than a sigh, yet it carried the weight of years of knowledge too old to be entirely understood. "I had thought," he murmured at last, his voice steady but quiet, as if raising it too high might wake the thing they had not yet named, "that the warnings of our fathers were the kind that belonged to stories, cautionary tales, words meant to temper greed, to remind us that even the greatest stoneworker may find his end beneath the weight of his own hands. I had thought they were for kings, for those who would hoard wealth beyond reason, who would call upon the mountain to give them more than it was willing. I had thought them wisdom, but not prophecy. His fingers twitched at his side, flexing slightly as if testing the solidity of his own flesh, reassuring himself that he was still here, still whole. I was wrong. Borrier swallowed, his throat dry, though he had no reason to be thirsty. The taste of dust lingered on his tongue, but it was not the rich earthen dust of the deeper tunnels, nor the sharp tang of freshly split mithril. It was different, thicker, heavier, tainted with something his mind could not name. He had spent years working in these depths, years learning the moods of the mountain, understanding its language in a way that even the elves could not. He had always believed that the earth was a thing of patience, of endurance, that it was unmoved by the squabbles of men and elves, that it cared nothing for the wars that raged beyond its walls. It simply was, steady, constant. Now he was not so sure. "Nar," he said softly, testing the weight of the word. "What do you know of Durin's Bane?" Nar did not answer immediately. He turned slightly, his gaze shifting to the shadows that lay beyond the reach of the lantern light, as if expecting something to be watching. Perhaps it was. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, slow, as if he were feeling his way through the words, unearthing them like relics from beneath forgotten stone. "We do not speak of it lightly," he said. "Even the name is seldom uttered in the halls of our fathers. It is not simply a tale, nor merely a warning. It is a wound, a thing that should not have been, that should not still be. We do not know when it came, nor what slumbers in the deep, only that it does." His hands curled into fists at his sides, though whether from anger or fear, Borrier could not tell. "They say," Nar continued, his voice quieter now, "that it is older than Khazad-dûm itself, older than the first halls that Durin carved, older than the elves, perhaps even older than the world as we know it. That it is not of the earth, nor of the sky, nor of the waters. That it was born in a time before the sun and moon, before the stars were placed, before the music of the Inor had finished its first song." Borrier felt something cold coil in his chest. He had heard such words before, in the hushed whispers of lore masters, in the half-spoken mutterings of old dwarves who had seen too much. He had never put much stock in them. The world was made of stone and fire, of iron and ore, of the things that could be shaped and understood. But there was something about the way Nar spoke, the way his words settled in the quiet space between heartbeats, that made him doubt. He took a slow breath. "If it is so old," he said carefully, "then why has it remained hidden? Why have we not heard of it before?" Nar did not look at him. "Because it does not wake," he murmured. "It does not rise. It does not hunger. It does not reach. It sleeps. And the only thing that can wake it," Borrier closed his eyes, exhaling softly, "is us." A sound, faint but distinct, rippled through the cavern. It was not the sound of shifting rock, nor of collapsing stone. It was softer, deeper, like breath. The lanterns flickered, the air felt thinner, For the first time in his life, Borrier, son of Thalone, felt that the mountain above him was not shelter. It was a prison. The air had changed. It was not a wind, nor even a true movement, but rather a feeling, a shifting weight, a displacement of something that had rested in the deep places for longer than memory could reach. The lanterns, which had burned steady and sure against the unyielding blackness of the cavern, flickered with an uneasy hesitation, their flames wavering as if struggling against an invisible force, as though even fire itself had begun to doubt its place in this hallowed kingdom of stone. The dwarves, hardened as they were, men of iron and granite who had carved the bones of the world with steady hands and unshaken hearts, stood in uneasy silence. Their breaths slow and measured, each one aware that the echo of their own lungs now felt too loud, too intrusive, too real. Beneath their feet, the rock was no longer a foundation of security, no longer a firm pillar upon which their lives had been built, but something thinner, hollow, the illusion of permanence stripped away in a single moment of unnatural quiet. A rear exhaled, but the sound of it felt smaller than it should have. He could feel his own pulse in his fingertips, in his throat, in the very core of his chest, but it was no longer in rhythm with the world around him. The mountain, once a steadfast presence, an unchanging sentinel beneath which his people had thrived, now seemed uncertain, hesitant, as if it too had felt the thing that had woken in the darkness. Nar was the first to break the silence, but even he, the eldest among them, the one whose voice had carried weight in the deepest halls of Durin's folk, spoke with an unfamiliar hesitation, as though measuring the very shape of his own words before he allowed them to cross the threshold of his lips. "There are places," he murmured, his voice a low tremor, a distant avalanche rolling through unseen caverns. "Places where the stone is older than we understand, older than even Duran himself. We have always known this in the way that a child knows not to stray too far into the unknown. We tell stories, we speak of caution, we mark tunnels with runes of warning, not always because we know what lies beyond them, but because we feel somewhere deep within our bones that some things were not meant to be disturbed, that there are depths beyond depths, layers of the world that do not belong to us, that do not even belong to time itself." His fingers traced the handle of his hammer, a slow and absent motion, as if seeking the comfort of something tangible, something that could ground him in the presence of an understanding he did not wish to acknowledge. His eyes, dark as the tunnels themselves, did not meet Bor's, but rather remained fixed upon the jagged wound in the rock where their picks had struck too deep. "There are things beneath the stone," he continued, his breath measured, steady though the flicker of his hands betrayed the weight of what he spoke. "Things that sleep, things that do not hunger, nor dream, nor seek, but simply remain waiting, enduring. Because time does not touch them as it touches us. Because they were before, and they will be after." Orir felt his jaw tighten. The whether in resistance to fear, or in the futile attempt to grasp the enormity of the thought, he did not know. He had spent his life among the roots of the mountains, shaping them, learning their language, feeling the slow, patient rhythm of their ancient songs. But never had he questioned what lay beyond the stone, because stone was the world. It was not a veil, not a barrier to something else. It simply was. And yet he could feel it now, the emptiness that stretched beyond the cracks in the rock, an absence that was not merely the void of another cavern, another tunnel, but something deeper, something vast and unknowable. The lantern light did not reach into that space, and Borrier wondered, no, he knew, that if he stepped forward, if he peered beyond that final threshold, he would see nothing. Not the walls of another chamber, not the glint of hidden ore. Just blackness. True, endless blackness. "We should seal it," he said at last, though even as the words left him they felt strange, as if he were saying them not because they would change anything, but because it was the only thing he could say, the only thing that made sense in a world that had, in the span of a single breath, shifted beneath him. Nar did not look away from the opening, but his hands tightened on his hammer, his fingers pressing into the cold metal as if trying to feel its reality beneath his touch. "Aye," he said, though his voice was distant, his mind already somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath them all. One of the young miners, Darrell, son of Grander, no more than 70 years old and yet already strong and arm and sharp in wit, took a hesitant step forward. His face half illuminated by the lantern's glow, his eyes flicked between Nar and Borrier, searching their expressions as if looking for reassurance, for the certainty that had always been the foundation of their people. "You truly think it is something more than a hollow?" His voice was cautious, but laced with the stubborn practicality of youth, with the need to understand the thing that threatened the order of his world. "Perhaps it is only a great chasm, an old cavern that has lain untouched. We have found many such places before, and none of them held any ghosts." Borrier did not answer immediately, for how could he? He could not name what it was they had disturbed. He could not point to it, nor strike it with his chisel, nor weigh it in his hand. He could only feel it. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled him. He had always trusted stone, because stone was real, solid, predictable. But this was not stone. Nor, however, did answer his voice quieter than before, heavier with the weight of long-kept knowledge. "It is not ghosts we fear," he murmured. "It is not spirits nor curses, nor any spell of elf or man." He exhaled his breath, slow, steady. "It is the dark itself." Darrell hesitated, the defiance in his stance faltering for just a moment. His fingers twitched against the haft of his pickaxe, his grip uncertain now, as if even the thought of striking stone again had become a dangerous thing. "Then what do we do?" he asked, his voice smaller than before, though he tried to hide it. For a long moment, no one answered. And then, from the depths of the opening, from the hollow space where the lantern light did not reach, came a sound. Not a roar, not a cry, a whisper. It was not a voice, not truly, for it carried no words, no meaning that could be grasped or shaped into language. It was softer than the sound of dust falling from the walls, quieter than the slow shift of settling stone. But it was there, and it was listening. The lantern flames flickered once more, and this time they did not steady. Borrier did not need to speak, nor did Nar. Every dwarf in that tunnel knew, with the certainty of those who had spent their lives reading the language of the earth, that something had awoken, and it was waiting. There was no more movement, no whisper of shifting rock, no faint stir of dust falling from the high vaults above. No sound save for the breathing of those who stood in the tunnel, their hands tightening around the hilts of their axes. And yet the stillness was not that of peace, nor even of unease. It was a stillness that carried weight, as if the very air had thickened, as if the walls, the floors, the ceiling itself had drawn in closer, pressing inward with an unseen force, making the vast halls of Khazad-dûm feel smaller, more fragile. as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. The glow of the lanterns, warm and steady only moments before, had taken on a different quality. No longer casting bold beams of light, no longer illuminating the tunnel in sure golden brilliance. Now they flickered, hesitant and uncertain, as if they too sensed the presence of something unseen. The shadows, which should have remained still obedient to the fire's command, now seemed to stretch just a little further than they ought, clinging to the jagged edges of the tunnel's opening, curling into the wound in the stone like fingers grasping at the threshold of something newly disturbed. Borrier felt the weight of it in his chest. Not merely a sense of foreboding, but something heavier, something deeper. As if the very air he breathed carried the taste of something long buried, something not meant for the lungs of living folk. He did not fear the dark. He had never feared it. For the dwarves were a people of the depths, of tunnels carved through the bones of the world, of mines that stretched deep into the ancient rock where the light of the sun had never set foot. But this darkness was different. It was not merely the absence of light, it was a presence unto itself. Nar had not moved, his heavy frame motionless as stone, his breath slow and measured, though his fingers still clenched tightly around the haft of his hammer. His eyes, shadowed beneath the heavy ridge of his brow, remained fixed upon the open wound in the tunnel wall, as though he were trying to see something beyond the void, as though he were searching for the answer to a question he did not want to ask. "It was not meant to be woken," he murmured at last, his voice barely more than a breath, a thought given shape. "Not now. Not ever." Borrier exhaled slowly, steadying himself before he spoke. "Then we have no choice," he said, his voice firm though the weight in his chest had not lessened. "We seal it. We collapse the tunnel. We bury it beneath stone and forget it was ever found." There was silence for a moment, a pause in which the others waited, listening, gauging the shape of the words as they settled in the air. It was Darrell who finally spoke, his voice uncertain, though edged with the stubborn defiance of youth. "And if it is nothing?" he asked, though his grip on his pickaxe had not loosened. "If it is only an empty space, a hollow in the rock, a forgotten cavern, nothing more?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "If we seal it, if we turn away, then we will never know. And what if what lies beyond is not some darkness waiting to devour us, but something meant to be found? What if this is an opportunity and not a curse?" Ormare turned to him, his expression unreadable, though his mind was already moving, already forming the words he did not wish to say. "And if it is more than that?" he countered, his voice calm but heavy, the weight of the moment pressing against him. "If we do not seal it, if we step forward instead of turning back, if we press further into the dark, if we wake something that should have been left to sleep, what then?" Darrell did not answer, but the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. He was young, still full of the fire of curiosity, the hunger for discovery, the belief that the world was a thing to be shaped, not feared. But there was something deeper than knowledge in the tunnels of the dwarves. There was wisdom, and wisdom was knowing when to dig and when to let the stone remain unbroken. Nar exhaled through his nose, the sound deep and slow like the shifting of great mountains. "There are things beneath the world, Darrell," he said, his voice like the low rumble of distant thunder. "Things older than the stars, older than the first halls of Duran, older than the hands that shaped this mountain. You think because you hold a pickaxe, because you wield fire and iron, because your feet walk upon solid stone, that you are its master. But the world is not ours to command. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to it. And if we are wise, we listen when it speaks." Darrell swallowed again, though he said nothing. The others, watching in silence, seemed to shift their weight, uneasy but unwilling to challenge the words that had been spoken. They were dwarves, proud and stubborn, strong in their craft, and unshaken in their purpose. But even the greatest stonecutter knew when to respect the mountain, when to bow before something greater than themselves. Borrier stepped forward, placing a hand upon the jagged rock where the tunnel had broken open, pressing his palm against the cold surface, feeling the texture beneath his fingers. The sharpness of freshly split stone, the rough edges where the picks had bitten too deep, the thin, unnatural chill that radiated from within. "We seal it," he said again, and this time there was no challenge. The others moved slow at first, then with purpose. The lanterns were set aside, their dim glow casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. The hammers were lifted, the tools of their craft turned now not to creation, but to burial. Stone was gathered, broken shards and heavy slabs, and the first strike fell. The sound of it ringing through the tunnel, sharp and final. But as the wall was built, as rock and rubble were pressed against the wound in the mountain, the darkness beyond did not retreat. And though no voice had spoken, no whisper had risen from the hollow beyond, Borrier could not shake the feeling that something was watching, that something was listening, and that, though they would bury it, though they would seal the tunnel and mark it upon their maps as a place never to be touched again, it was not gone. It was only waiting. The tunnel was sealed. The last stone had been placed with deliberate force, each crack filled, each gap smoothed over, as though the very act of covering the wound in the mountain could erase the memory of its opening. Dust still hung in the air, clinging to the flickering glow of the lanterns, moving in slow, hesitant swirls, as if reluctant to settle, as if reluctant to let this place return to silence. The echoes of the final hammer strokes had faded, their impact swallowed by the vastness of the caverns, but even as the stillness returned, it did not feel like peace. Boromir let out a slow breath, his fingers trailing along the edge of the sealed wall, feeling the cold, rough surface beneath his touch. It was solid, secure, unyielding. And yet for all its strength, it did not feel like protection. It felt like a thin veil, a fragile barrier between themselves and something deeper, something older, something that had not been meant to be disturbed. "We should leave," Nar murmured at last, his voice low, barely above a breath. He was not looking at the wall, but at the darkness beyond their lantern light, his eyes distant, his face lined with the weight of something unspoken. "This place is done. There is nothing more for us here." Borrier nodded, though he did not immediately turn away. His mind was a tangle of thoughts, of questions he dared not voice, of a feeling that ran deeper than fear, something colder, heavier, something that clung to the edges of his understanding like mist curling around a mountainside. He had spent his life in these tunnels, had shaped their walls with his own hands, had read the language of the stone as if it were an old friend. But for the first time he felt as though the mountain was no longer speaking to him. It was watching. Durin shifted beside him, the unease clear in the way he held himself, his usual confidence replaced by something tighter, something more uncertain. "And what do we tell the others?" he asked, though there was no challenge in his voice, only the quiet weight of doubt. "What do we say when they ask why we turned back?" Borrier hesitated, his fingers curling against his palm, his thoughts turning over the question like a stone rolled in the currents of a river. The truth was not something that could be easily spoken. It was not something that could be written into the ledgers, recorded in the archives of their people. It was not a thing that fit into the language of miners and builders, of craftsmen and smiths. "We tell them the tunnel was unstable," he said at last, his voice steady, though the words felt strange on his tongue. "That the rock was too fractured, the walls too weak. That we made the choice to seal it for the safety of all." Nar turned his head slightly, his gaze sharp, assessing. He said nothing, but there was an understanding in his expression, a flicker of something that passed between them without the need for words. This was not a lie, not truly, for there was danger here, danger that went beyond the physical, and yet it was not the whole truth either. Darrow frowned, his grip tightening on his pickaxe. "And if someone digs again?" Borrier met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Then they will find nothing but stone." The answer did not satisfy him, but there was no further protest. The decision had been made. The tunnel was sealed. There was no reason to linger. They turned away, their lanterns casting long, shifting shadows against the walls as they moved back through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. But as they walked, as the distance between them and the sealed chamber grew, Borrier could not shake the feeling that the silence was following them. The halls of Khazad-dûm had always carried echoes, the steady ring of hammers against stone, the deep voices of dwarves raised in song, the rhythmic footsteps of workers moving through the great corridors, the sounds of life of labor of a people who had made the mountain their home. But now as they moved through the passages, it was as though the silence itself had taken form, pressing against them like the weight of an unseen presence. Borrier had always trusted the earth beneath his feet. It had been his anchor, his foundation, the one constant in a world that was ever-changing. But now, as he walked the familiar halls of his ancestors, he felt something he had never felt before. He felt lost. By the time they reached the deeper halls, the air had grown warmer, the lantern light reflecting off the smooth stone walls, casting a golden glow that should have been comforting. But the feeling remained. The others had noticed it too, though none spoke of it aloud. It was in the way they moved, in the way their hands never strayed far from the hilts of their weapons, in the way their eyes flickered toward the darkness as the edges of the tunnels, as if expecting something to step forward from the void. Nor was the first to break the silence, his voice low, measured, the weight of years thick in his words. "I have seen many things in my time," he murmured, his gaze fixed ahead, though his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "I have walked tunnels that no living dwarf has set foot in for centuries. I have seen the remnants of halls long abandoned, where the dust lies thick upon the stone, and the air is heavy with the weight of forgotten voices. But never have I felt this." Bor glanced at him, his own thoughts tangled in the same unease. "What do you mean?" Nar exhaled slowly, the sound deep and heavy, as though he were drawing up something from the depths of himself. "It is not fear," he said after a moment, his voice quiet, thoughtful. "Not the kind that comes from danger, from the knowledge of battle, from the threat of death. It is something older, something colder, as if the mountain itself has changed." Borrier did not answer immediately, his gaze flickering to the high, vaulted ceilings above them, the great pillars carved with the runes of their ancestors, the echoes of their footsteps fading into the vastness of the chamber. He had always felt a connection to this place, to the weight of history that rested in its walls, but now that connection felt severed. "It has," he murmured, more to himself and to the others. Nar turned to him, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. But in that moment they both understood. This was not the end of something. It was the beginning. And whatever lay beneath the mountain, whatever had stirred in the darkness beyond that broken rock, was not gone. It was only waiting. The halls of Khazad-dûm stretched before them, vast and echoing, their stone-carved ribs arching high above like the great trunks of an ancient forest, their towering pillars rising like roots that had grown not from soil, but from the bone of the world itself. The golden light of their lanterns flickered upon the polished walls, revealing the delicate etchings of runes long carved by the hands of dwarves who had walked these halls in ages past, whose voices had once filled these corridors with laughter, with song, with the clamor of hammer upon anvil, and the steady rhythm of life in the great city beneath the mountains. And yet, though the stone still stood unchanged in its strength, something had shifted. The air had thickened, as though the weight of the mountain pressed heavier than it once had, as though the silence that followed them through the tunnels was not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something unseen, something that moved beyond the edges of their perception, watching from the depths where their lantern light could not reach. Born walked in measured steps, his boots striking the stone with the steady cadence of one who had spent his life beneath the earth. Yet there was no comfort in the familiar sound. His mind was restless, turning over the events of the past hours, searching for some rational foothold upon which to steady himself. He had told the others that they would seal the tunnel, and they had done so. Yet even as the last stone had been placed, as the final hammer stroke had echoed into silence, the unease had not lifted. The walls had been closed, but something had remained. Not behind them, nor beneath them, but around them, within them, woven into the very air they breathed. He could feel it, as one feels the distant tremor of an avalanche before the stones begin to fall. An absence where there should have been nothing at all. Nar walked beside him, his heavy brow furrowed, his fingers curled loosely around the haft of his hammer. He had not spoken since they had left the lower tunnels, and there was a tension in the way he moved, a stiffness in his shoulders that Borrier recognized as something close to hesitation. Nar was not a dwarf who doubted easily. He had spent his years carving through the deepest veins of the mountain, had walked paths that no other living dwarf had set foot upon, had carried the weight of knowledge that came not from books, nor from the wisdom of scholars, but from the stone itself. And yet here, in the heart of Khazad-dûm, where the halls stretched grand and unwavering, where the banners of their forefathers hung in solemn reverence, he carried himself as one who had been made uncertain. At last, the silence between them broke, though he did not turn his head, his voice emerging slow and thoughtful, as though the words had been forming long before they had been spoken. "There are things," he murmured, "that we were never meant to understand. Things that were buried long before our people set foot in these halls. We build, we carve, we craft the bones of the world into shapes of our own making. But we are not its masters. We are only guests. And sometimes guests overstay their welcome. He exhaled, his breath heavy as if carrying the weight of something he did not wish to name. I have never been one to believe in fate, nor in warnings spoken by those who do not know the feel of a pickaxe in their hand. But what we found today, I cannot shake it, Borrier. It was not simply the discovery of an empty cavern. It was not merely the opening of a new passage. It was something else. Borrier nodded slowly, though the gesture was more for himself than for Nar. I know, he said, his voice quiet but firm. It was as if the mountain itself had changed, as if the weight of the rock above us had shifted, and yet not in any way that we could see. I have spent my life working in these tunnels. I know the feel of solid stone beneath my feet. But there, in that place, it was as if the earth had hollowed itself out beneath us, as if we stood on something that had been waiting. Nar's eyes flickered toward him then, sharp and searching. Waiting, he echoed, as though testing the word, feeling its weight before allowing it to settle into truth. He was silent for a long moment before he shook his head, his fingers tightening against the handle of his hammer. We should not speak of it, he said at last. Not to the others. Not to the council. Not to the lore masters who will ask too many questions. If we give it a name, if we allow it to take shape in words, then it becomes something more than a feeling. It becomes real. And I would rather it remain forgotten. Born or understood, and yet even as he nodded, even as he told himself that they would leave it buried, he could not shake the feeling that it was already too late. The mountain had changed. The air had shifted. And the silence that had followed them from the tunnels had not left them behind as they walked deeper into the halls of Khazad. The lanterns above flickered, their golden light swaying as though touched by a wind that did not exist. The great forge of Khazad-dûm burned brightly, its fires casting long, flickering shadows across the smooth stone walls, the heat rising in waves that shimmered against the air. The scent of molten metal, thick and familiar. It was a place of life, of work, of creation. Here the hammers rang out in steady rhythm, the anvils sang beneath the weight of skillful hands. The embers crackled with the sound of something being shaped into permanence. And yet, even in the heart of the city where the fires never dimmed, the unease did not fade. Borrier leaned against one of the great pillars that lined the chamber, his arms crossed, his mind distant. He had come here for comfort, for the steady sounds of labor, for the warmth of the forge that had always been a place of certainty, of clarity. And yet, though the flames burned bright, though the dwarves moved with purpose, he could not shake the cold that lingered beneath his skin, the memory of the silence that had followed him from the lower tunnels. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You look like a dwarf who has seen a ghost." He turned to see Grendr, one of the elder smiths, his beard thick with soot, his hands calloused from years of working the forge. His eyes, sharp with the wisdom of age, studied Borrier carefully, as though he could see something beneath the surface, something unspoken. Borrier hesitated before answering, his voice measured. "Not a ghost," he said slowly, "but something just as restless." Grendr nodded, though his expression did not change. He had been a smith for longer than most had been alive, had seen the rise and fall of fortunes, had watched as halls were carved and then abandoned, as new veins of mithril were found only to be exhausted in time. He understood that there were things beneath the earth that did not always belong to those who claimed them. "The mountain remembers," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, thoughtful. "It remembers the hands that have shaped it, the footsteps that have walked its halls. But it also remembers what came before. And sometimes what came before remembers too." Borrier felt the weight of those words settle in his chest, though he did not answer. There was nothing more to say. The forge burned on, its flames rising and falling, its shadows flickering along the walls. And somewhere deep beneath the stone, something was still waiting. The great halls of Khazad-dûm stretched into the depths, their high, arched ceilings disappearing into darkness, their towering pillars carved with the likeness of trees, their roots etched into the stone as though even in the deep places of the world, the dwarves wished to remember the forests they had never known. The soft golden glow of lanterns flickered upon the polished floors, casting elongated shadows that wavered and shifted as the flames danced, sending glimmers of light scuttling across the great murals that adorn the walls. Scenes of Durin the Deathless, of the first halls hewn from the rock, of the rivers of Mithril that had once gleamed beneath the touch of their forges. And yet for all its grandeur, for all the weight of its history, for all the strength of its foundations, there was something uneasy in the air, something that had begun to fester beneath the stone, like a wound that had not yet broken the surface. Bor walked slowly through the great corridor, his steps heavy, his thoughts heavier still. His mind circling back to the same unspoken question that had followed him since they had left the lower tunnels. The silence had not left them. It had crept into the very bones of the city, into the spaces between the chisel marks on the walls, into the slow, methodical ringing of hammers upon anvils, into the quiet conversations of dwarfs who did not yet understand why they spoke more softly now, why they glanced toward the deeper tunnels with wary eyes, while the echoes of their voices seemed to stretch just a little too far, as though something beneath the surface was listening. He had never been one to entertain fear. Fear was for those who did not understand the stone, for those who hesitated before striking metal to rock, for those who did not trust the weight of the mountain above them. But this was not fear. It was something else. A certainty, unspoken, unformed, but no less real. Na had spoken no further of what they had found, but his silence was telling. He had gone to the council, had spoken in quiet tones with those who sat upon the stone chairs, with those who carried the wisdom of ages upon their shoulders, with those who decided where the axes would strike, where the forges would burn, where the tunnels would run. But there had been no command to dig deeper, nor to return to the sealed chamber. There had been no summons for the lore masters to study the rock, no gathering of scholars to decipher what had been uncovered. There had only been silence. And Borrier knew, without being told, that the decision had been made not out of ignorance, but out of understanding. As he approached the forge chambers, the heat of the flames pulsed against his skin, the scent of molten metal thick in the air, the clang of iron upon iron ringing in steady rhythm, a song as old as the halls themselves. The smiths worked in tireless motion, their faces set in quiet focus, their hands moving with practiced precision, shaping steel and gold and silver, their hammers beating away the doubts that had begun to settle like dust upon their spirits. But even here in the beating heart of Khazad-dûm, the unease remained. It was in the way the younger smiths paused between strikes, in the way the older ones glanced toward the doorways as if expecting something to appear from the darkness beyond, in the way the fires, for all their brightness, did not seem to drive away the shadow that lingered at the edges of the chamber. Grendr stood at the far end of the room, his broad frame silhouetted against the roaring furnace, his thick arms folded across his chest, his eyes unreadable beneath the weight of his furrowed brow. He had been working the forge for longer than Borrier had been alive, had shaped the blades of kings and the armor of warriors, had seen the rise and fall of fortunes beneath the mountain, had known the taste of both triumph and sorrow in equal measure. And yet, as Borrier approached, he saw something in the elder smith's face that he had never seen before. Uncertain. "You have been restless," Gra said, his voice low, steady, measured like the swing of a hammer. He did not turn his head, did not break his gaze from the flames that licked hungrily at the metal within the forge, as though the fire itself was listening. Borrier hesitated, though only for a moment. "And you have not?" Grendr exhaled slowly, the sound lost beneath the roar of the furnace, though his fingers curled slightly against his arms as if grasping at something unseen. "I have lived through many seasons beneath this mountain," he murmured, his tone carrying the weight of years. "I have seen the dwarves grow bold in their craft. I have seen them carve halls so vast they seem to stretch into the very bones of the world. I have seen them strike deep into the rock in search of riches, in search of knowledge, in search of something greater than themselves. And I have seen the mountain answer." He turned then, his eyes settling upon Bor, sharp as the edge of a newly forged blade. "It is an old thing, this mountain, older than us, older than the halls we have built, older than the names carved into the stone. And there are places within it that we have not yet touched, that perhaps we were never meant to touch." Borrier did not look away, though the words settled uneasily in his chest. "Then why do we dig?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Grendr gave a small, grim smile. "Because it is in our nature, because we are not content to let the stone rest, because we believe that if there is something beneath it, it must belong to us. Because we are dwarves, and we have never known when to stop." He let out a breath, shaking his head. "But there is wisdom in knowing when to turn back. And I wonder, Borrier, have we already passed that point?" Borrier did not answer. He did not need to. The silence spoke for him. Outside the forge, beyond the halls where the lantern burned, beyond the reach of fire and steel and stone, something was stirring. It did not move as living things moved, did not breathe as living things breathed. It was not bound by the walls of Khazad-dûm, nor by the hands that had carved its halls, nor by the will of those who walked its paths. It had waited as the mountain had waited, as the darkness had waited, and soon it would wake. The silence had followed them from the lower tunnels, and it had never left. The deep places of the world were not silent, even when no voices filled the great halls, even when no hammer rang against the forge, even when the footfalls of the dwarves ceased to echo in the endless corridors. The mountain still breathed. It exhaled in the slow shifting of stone, in the creak of ancient timbers supporting ceilings so high they seemed like the sky, in the soft, distant murmuring of water flowing through unseen caverns deep beneath the roots of Khazad-dûm. But what had once been the steady pulse of an enduring kingdom now felt like something else entirely, like something listening, something waiting, something awake. The lanterns still burned in the great halls, their golden light stretching along the polished floors, glinting off the silver-inlaid runes that traced the columns like the veins of some ancient tree carrying the wisdom of their forefathers in the language of stone. But where once that glow had been warm, a beacon of craftsmanship and pride, it now seemed fragile, uncertain, flickering as if tested by an unseen wind. Shadows pulled where they should not have, shifting in the corners of the great chambers, stretching across the murals of Duran's legacy, lingering beneath the high, vaulted arches as though they were gathering their strength. Moria felt it as he walked, his footsteps measured but heavy, each stride filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts, of questions he dared not voice aloud. The presence he had sensed since they left the lower tunnels had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, more certain, as though it no longer needed to hide. It clung to the air, settling into the very bones of Khazad-dûm, creeping through the stone like roots through ancient soil. And yet, for all his unease, he did not turn back. There was no turning back. Nar was waiting in the council chamber, seated at the long stone table carved from a single slab of black granite, its edges polished smooth by generations of hands that had traced its surface in thought and debate. The chamber was grand, yet solemn, a place of decision, of careful words and heavy choices. Runes of past rulers lined the walls, their stories etched into the rock, their deeds immortalized in the silent language of their people. And yet, as Borrier entered, even the weight of history did not feel as strong as it once had. Nar's face was lined with thought, his fingers idly tracing the handle of his hammer, as if seeking some reassurance in its familiar shape. He did not look up immediately, did not speak right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, measuring it, testing it, allowing it to settle in the space between words. And when he finally did speak, his voice was quiet but heavy, as if he had already carried this conversation within him before it had even begun. "You feel it," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. Borrier exhaled slow and deliberate before lowering himself onto the bench opposite him. He did not answer immediately because there was no need, because they both knew that whatever words he chose, whatever reasoning he might give, they would only confirm what had already been felt, what had already begun. "Aye," he murmured at last. "It is in the halls now. It is in the air we breathe." He paused, staring at the flame of the nearest lantern, watching as it swayed against a wind that did not exist. "It was never meant to be disturbed, Nar. And yet, here we are." Nar nodded slowly, his fingers still against the haft of his hammer, his gaze fixed upon the long shadows that stretched along the floor, their edges too sharp, too deliberate, as if they had a mind of their own. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice contemplative, the words measured as though he were carving them from stone itself, "of the stories we were told as children, the tales of the deep, of the places we were warned never to tread. Not because they were unstable, not because they were too dangerous, but because they were not ours. Because there are things that do not belong to the hands of the living." His brow furrowed, his voice lowering, his thoughts unraveling into words that tasted of something deeper than memory. "I have always believed that we are the masters of our craft, that the earth yields to us because we understand it. But now I wonder if there are parts of the world that do not yield, not because they are unwilling, but because they are already spoken for." Borrier closed his eyes for a long moment, his mind circling around the weight of that thought, around the possibility that they had not merely awakened something, but that they had trespassed, that what lay beneath the stone was not simply waiting, but guarding. and that in their endless hunger for the riches of the deep, they had broken something that had been meant to remain whole. "There is a price," he murmured, half to himself, half to the stone walls that had listened to the voices of kings and miners alike, to the mountain that had stood longer than any name carved into its halls. "There is always a price." Nar let out a slow breath, his grip tightening on his hammer. "Then the only question that remains," he said, his voice steady but solemn, "is whether we have already begun to pay it." For a long while neither of them spoke, and then the sound came. It was not the shifting of stone, not the creak of wood settling beneath the weight of ages, not the slow, steady exhale of the mountain breathing in its sleep. It was something else, a sound that did not belong in the walls of the dwarves, a sound that had never belonged in the realm of light and fire, in the places where hammers rang and voices sang and life endured. It was a sound that came from the depth, a deep, resonant pulse, a vibration through the stone, a tremor that was not a quake, but something more deliberate, something aware. It rolled through the chamber like the distant toll of a bell, low and ancient, carrying with it a sense of something vast, something that had woken not because it had been disturbed, but because it had chosen to wake. Boromir's breath caught in his throat. The lanterns flickered wildly, their flames stretching high as if pulled toward something unseen. The shadows along the walls shuddered, stretched, moved. And for the first time in his life, for the first time since he had taken up the tools of his people and sworn himself to the stone, he felt the ground beneath him and realized it did not belong to them. Nar rose slowly, his face grim, his hand tightening around his hammer. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the chamber like a chisel striking marble, final and unyielding. "It is awake." A second pulse, closer, heavier. The air breathed. The fire dimmed. And deep below the roots of Khazad-dûm, far beneath the halls of stone and steel and pride, something stirred. And then the halls of Moria would never be the same again.